Guys, I would like to apologize. I was wrong about the One Piece live action. Yeah, I know, big, breaking, shocking news. My credibility is now gone because I'm changing my opinion instead of doubling down. But you know what? This is how the world works. As some of you may know, I was not exactly, impressed by the first trailer we saw of this new Netflix anime adaptation. And with this company's history with content like this, I didn't exactly have high expectations. I mean, I wasn't expecting it to be terrible or anything, but I was not expecting to like it at all. But now, the show is out. One Piece is finally here. And I actually kind of like it. Like, I honestly enjoyed myself quite a bit. Am I going crazy? So, yeah, I'm gonna say it. I was wrong about this show. I spoke too soon, and I am glad to say that everyone involved in this project surpassed my expectations immensely. Now, this show isn't perfect, and I do have some complaints that I want to get to later, but for now, I want to speak on all the positives because for one, there's way more of those, and because I've been pretty harsh to this series for a while, and it's time I give it the flowers it deserves now that it's out. And I think it's best to get the clear positive out of the way first, which is, of course, the casting. Almost every character in this show is cast to near perfection. I seriously don't think you could have found a better choice for anyone in the story. I was a bit skeptical about some of the actors, especially in the crew, but they all really surprised me. Iñaki Godoy as Luffy maintains the energy and boneheaded endearment of the character we know and love, while still adding a much more toned down and human approach to this character in order to make him work in live action. You can tell he really understands and loves this character, which makes him all the more entertaining to watch. He's just a very lovable, silly guy in this show. And that's all you need to nail Luffy. Mackenyu as Zoro was something I was rather interested to see, as the last Mackenyu movie I reviewed was Knights of the Zodiac, and that movie was terrible, so I was kind of concerned. And while at first I thought his edgy delivery in the first couple episodes was way too forced, that edginess was toned down a lot past the second episode, and he became a lot more down-to-earth, stoic, and likable. He surprisingly gets his few emotional beats down very well too. I was really impressed with him here. I was not expecting to like him in this show when I first talked about him on this channel. I did watch the Rurouni Kenshin movies about a month ago, so I did get to see some of his better chops in action, and it's nice to see that he was translated very well here compared to that, other movie. I have to say though, my favorite castings in the Straw Hats really have to be Emily Rudd as Nami and Taz Skylar as Sanji. Emily Rudd was the one casting I was on board with the most since the very beginning, and you know what? I was entirely right about her. She is perfect as this character. Nami was probably the easiest character to translate to live action since her character, at least at the beginning of the story, was always the most down-to-earth of them all. And I'm glad to see that Rudd portrays her vulnerability and hard-headedness very well. She's very witty and charismatic, and when it's time to get to the really emotional scenes, she absolutely delivers some tearjerkers. And you know what? I'd say the same thing for Taz Skylar too. His version of Sanji is also very toned down like Luffy to fit a similar character archetype found in film. He's very suave and charismatic, and his arc in Baratie was honestly my favorite in the entire show so far. The farewell to Zeph, while different, was very well done and was probably the scene that got me the closest to being emotional. His backstory in this show was damn near as good as the manga version, which is so surprising for me to say. In fact, it feels crazy for me to say that he is my favorite in the show so far because I'm not even that big of a Sanji fan. But pretty much as soon as he's introduced into this show, he absolutely steals it. He's just so entertaining and it makes me want to see Taz Skylar in a lot more stuff in the future. The entire crew has amazing chemistry and you can tell everyone here feels like real friends that are enjoying what they do. All of their performances are much better when they're together, and it's very noticeable. And there is nothing more addicting than watching shows or movies where the actors are having fun with each other. It always makes the experience much better. Some of the actors are definitely much better than others here, however, the ones that I'm a bit more on the edge about are still entertaining enough for me not to be bothered by them. Besides, I'm not expecting like Emmy award winners or anything out of this show, but there are times where the acting is just a little bit iffy for me. Not often, but sometimes. I think for the most part, everyone does their job either serviceably or very well, which is enough for me. Surprisingly though, if I had to pick my favorites in the entire show, my two favorite castings would probably be Buggy and Garp. Jeff Ward is absolutely hilarious as Buggy, and yet he can still come across as intimidating at times. In fact, when he first got introduced, I found him a bit more intimidating than I found Arlong in the entire show, which is so funny. He's very explicit, he's incredibly goofy, but it's still not overdone. I got a bit of Jim Carrey vibes from him, honestly. He is around for a lot more time than you'd expect, but he never overstays his welcome, and when he does start to get annoying, he typically gets what he deserves right after, so it's all the more satisfying. Vincent Reagan as Garp is also very good. I mean, he's pretty much just Garp in real life, so it's really not a surprise, in all honesty. There's many other castings I loved too, but we'd be here all day if we only talked about the actors, because in all honesty, I think they were all great. So I'm gonna move on. The action is very well done here. I said in my video on the first trailer that I was very concerned about how the CGI would look, and while it's not amazing from what we got, it's not at all the worst thing ever, and there really isn't that much of it to begin with. They kinda hide and hold back a lot of the CGI for Luffy's powers as much as they can, and a lot of the impact and attacks are done practically. Like, most of the action is done entirely with practical effects. And I love practical action sequences, so I really enjoyed seeing it here. There was this one fight scene with the red-haired pirates that just looked so great, and I was kind of geeking out when I saw it. The choreography is fantastic, and every character fights very unique compared to one another. The cinematography is also very good for the action and typically follows the weapons rather than the characters, which makes for some very cool dynamic shots. And I also have to get this out of the way, but the set designs in this show are just so perfect. They are honestly what carries this show to be as good as it is for me because of just how amazing they look. They translated these very cartoonish locations and added their own creative twists to them to make them work in a live action scenario without taking the heart away from it. From the exteriors to the indoor lighting and scenery, the effort and detail put into these sets are brilliant, and they are so beautiful and mesmerizing to look at. One of my absolute favorite things about this show, though, is that there's also a surprisingly high amount of moments scattered between episodes where the story will just pause for a moment and let the characters just hang out or have a conversation for some relationship and character development. This is something we don't really see in the anime and manga, especially not anymore, since the story is always constantly moving forward. And I know a lot of people are going to get mad at me for pointing that out, but it's true. We don't get scenes like this. So seeing scenes of Luffy and Kobe, or Luffy and Usopp, or Luffy and Sanji, or Luffy and Zoro just sitting down and talking while nothing else happens is really cool to see. The problem with a lot of live action anime adaptations is that they never really bring anything new to the table that the anime or manga haven't already done 100 times better. But here they add a lot more subtlety and humanity to how the characters in this show interact. They aren't afraid to let the plot take a back seat so that we can connect with these characters and get to know them. Even characters like Helmeppo are given extra scenes that give them more depth than they ever had in the anime and manga. And I think that's especially important for people that are watching this series without any prior experience with the story of One Piece. The show takes a lot of liberties from the source material, but they're almost always for a good reason, and it never strives too far away. There are times that I will get to later that are a bit odd, but for the most part, most of the changes benefit how this show tells its version of Oda's work. And this next point might not make a lot of sense, but this show really is just full of good energy. I know that's not really an objective way to discuss filmmaking, but you know what? I don't really care. I review things how I want to review them. And this show is full of feel-good vibes without ever feeling obnoxious. There were so many moments where I was just watching and felt so happy because of both the nostalgia of seeing this story being told again and because of the campy charm that this show carries. I binged this show incredibly fast, which is something I don't really do anymore. Like, seriously, I hate binging stuff, but I did it here because I was engaged and enjoying myself the whole way through. I was very surprised with how hooked I was on this from the very beginning. I'm pretty relieved to say that the comedy in this show is pretty effective for the most part. From the trailers, I was really concerned we were going to get a bunch of quip-heavy MCU-styled humor in here, but thankfully that was not the case. Most of the comedy comes off from natural banter and interactions between the crew. There's also a bit of slapstick, which isn't exactly surprising for something like One Piece, but knowing Hollywood, it's relieving to see that they're utilizing it here with characters like Buggy and Usopp. Because one of the reasons why One Piece is funny in general is because it's creative with its humor, and they do utilize that here, which is very good to see. Usopp was especially pretty entertaining for the most part. I honestly wasn't really feeling it with the more serious and emotional scenes with him, for reasons I'll get to later. But when it was time to be the silly, childish goofball that Usopp is, he was really fun and entertaining to watch. There were a few comedic bits in Baratie and Arlong Park that I thought were really funny, and even his fight in Arlong Park was done pretty effectively. It's pretty much the exact same as it was in the manga, but it was translated very well, with both the humor and the underdog energy. I also love how Zoro and Sanji's banter was done here, although I wish there was more of it. Sanji doesn't get a lot of screen time here, so there aren't too many interactions between them, but whenever they are together, they bounce off one another very well. In the manga, they're like two dudes who just fucking hate each other's guts, but here it's a little bit different. Like, have you ever had that one kind of friend where you're just insulting each other all the time? Yeah, that's basically what they are here. They're not completely at their necks in the manga, but the banter and chemistry is still there. Their mannerisms and tone make it so you can tell they still have respect for one another despite their constant insults. And I like how that was done. So yeah, comedy is a big plus for the most part. Some of the jokes were a bit too repulsive and childish for me to laugh at, but for the most part, it's done more cleverly than most shows out there. I didn't write this in my script, but I also wanted to point out that the music in this show is very, very good as well. It's not the iconic soundtrack from the anime that we all know and love, and some people might not like that, but what we do get here is pretty decent as well. There's some tracks here that I might listen to on my own time, and that's a compliment in itself. However, there is one track that just feels really out of place. Whenever the fishmen, especially Arlong, is on screen, they're playing this YouTube-esque trap beat, which I guess is their theme song, and it's just so funny because it does not fit One Piece at all. Like, aside from that track, everything sounds really good, but I'm sorry, that's the funniest thing in the world. And this is where a lot of people are gonna get upset, because while I do like this show, I do have to say that there are just a couple complaints that I want to be vocal about, okay? Just a couple, not a lot. This show isn't perfect, and there are things that I really hope get improved on in later seasons. For one, the dialogue in this show can be kind of unbearable at times. Now, I did expect it to be a lot worse than it actually was, because for the most part, it's mostly fine. But there are times where the writing is so melodramatic that the actors just cannot deliver their lines in a believable way without sounding kind of dumb. Sometimes it feels like lines were just cut directly from the manga and pasted into the script without trying to humanize or live actionify it more, and it makes the tone of the show feel very wonky at times. There are some very intense scenes that I just cannot take seriously when the characters are talking like they're still in a cartoon. I get One Piece is a silly series, but if you want to make things work with human actors, you gotta give them more human lines, and sometimes it just isn't that. Also, this is something that I noticed in the show very early on, but there's a weird inconsistency with the cinematography in this show. Now, whenever the camera is focused on a wide shot or an establishing shot or even on the action, it looks very, very good, like it's really well done. But whenever we're close up with any character, there's this weird facial and background distortion that makes the actors look really weird and out of focus at times. Like, it makes them feel like they're way too close. Like, it feels claustrophobic. And this is the case for almost every close-up shot in the entire show. They'll be closer to someone and the background will look extremely bubbled out while the faces look kind of bloated, and it's just so distracting to me. I know it has to do with the lens because I know how cameras work, which means it is almost definitely intentional, but I can't tell if it's supposed to be some weird fisheye effect or if they just decided to not change the lens out for any of the shots. Sometimes there are medium shots too that look incredibly distorted and flat at the same time, and it just looks really off-putting, and there's no reason for it to look like this. This show costs too much to look this awkward as commonly as it does. I would give it a pass if it was just a couple instances, but it's at least a quarter of the shots in the entirety of this show. Everything is just too wide too often, and it makes the characters look uncomfortably close when they don't need to be. I also think there's just some really odd editing in this show. There's a lot of really awkward cuts. Like there's a scene where Arlong is giving a speech in the finale, and during his monologue there's a bunch of really weird cuts between his sentences that really pulled me out of the scene. I was already having a difficult time being intimidated by him, but the jarring edits in here made it even more difficult. I know this isn't something that many people will be bothered by, but when you've been editing videos for pretty much your entire life, wonky editing is gonna be noticeable, and it's gonna get on your nerves when you do notice it, so you guys have to at least understand where I'm coming from here. There's also some very oddly placed scenes here, like a lot of weirdly placed scenes. For example, in episode 4, when we're in the second half of Syrup Village, Zoro gets stuck in a well and has to climb out, so while he's climbing, it's switching between that and his backstory. At least to me, this really feels misplaced because, for one, this moment isn't really that tense, and it has little to nothing to do with his actual goal of being the world's strongest swordsman. Like, this feels like a really anticlimactic way to show his backstory. Everyone else, when it comes to their backstory, it's placed within some big character moment, but here it's not really like that. It's even weirder to think about too that it's placed here because the episode where he fights Mihawk is literally the episode right after this one, and that episode is pretty much all about their fight and Zoro's ambition. The entire climax of that episode is their fight. So if anything, his backstory being placed there would have made a lot more sense and tells a much more personal story. Jumping between the now and parts of his backstory, then leading into the biggest battle of his life up until this point, would have made it a lot more effective. Episode 4 is really the only episode that I don't like, and it's mostly because of that. In the previous episode, they show us Usopp's backstory too, and for the most part, it's just as forgettable as it was in the manga. It's just him going to his mom, and then she dies. And I feel like they had an opportunity to flesh out his relationship with his mother as a child in a longer flashback, but they didn't go for it. And I feel like if you have the reins to make some serious changes to the story for your adaptation, character moments like this are a lot more important than giving even more screen time to the Marines. At least for me, that's the case. I don't know about y'all. I just feel like they had an opportunity here and they just missed it. And while those critiques are more minor and don't really knock the show down too much for me, the one major issue I have with this show is that the Marines are just way too involved with the plot here. They try really hard to make the Marines as important as the Straw Hats. They are involved in literally everything. Like, I'm sorry, but they are incredibly forced into the story everywhere we go, and it's so annoying and takes too much time that could have been used to flesh out some of the Straw Hats more. One of the reasons why East Blue was so good in the manga and anime was because we were only following this group and discovering this world without very many interruptions. It was just us and them. It becomes a lot more disjointed when we're following an entirely different group at the same time. I like to see Kobe getting more development, but they are just popping up everywhere all the time for no reason. They're in Syrup Village, they come to Baratie, they come to Arlong Park, and they never leave until the season ends. And half the time they don't even actually do anything. They just talk, walk around, and then leave. They are shoehorned into every single arc. Even the final fight between Garp and Luffy is incredibly shoehorned and forced because not only does it immediately follow up a tense and emotional battle less than 15 minutes after it ended, but it doesn't have any point either because Garp isn't even going to arrest them. He just leaves because he was just testing Luffy. He was going all this way, went through all this trouble just to test him. I'm sorry, but that does not work. That feels like such a lame cop-out, and this subplot felt like such a waste of time. It really overstayed its welcome and could have been reduced to just one of the major East Blue arcs instead of spanning over the whole season. There were some nice interactions between Kobe and Luffy, but that doesn't make up for the amount of time we spend with the Marines. We do not need this big of a look into their side of things. With the quick pacing and short episode length this show has, it feels like they were biting off more than they could chew with this addition. This is my only real major gripe with the show. It really is. Everything else is relatively minor or is stuff I can look past, but this is just too big of a factor for me to brush off. It doesn't completely ruin the show for me. I still liked it a lot, but at times I kind of just felt myself checking out mentally because I was just wondering what the purpose of having the Marines in here so much would be, and it turned out they didn't have that much purpose after all. And my last complaint is probably the most obvious one, but the pacing in this show is just way too fast. This has become an issue in TV a lot recently. Disney Plus does this with basically every single one of their shows. The Last of Us had pacing issues, and yeah, this isn't an exception. Everything is going as fast as you can snap your fingers, and while it doesn't completely ruin the show, it does make some of the more emotional moments not hit as hard since they feel like they're just being glossed over. While we still have time to develop characters, I kind of got the feeling that there could have been more. This show really would have benefited a lot from being 10 episodes like it was originally planned to be rather than 8. And I don't mean 10 episodes to get to Logtown, just an extra 2 episodes to stretch and flesh out the content we already had. Let it breathe more. Even if you don't want to do that, I feel like if you just gave the episodes a few more minutes, it would have benefited greatly. Shows with just 8 episodes don't really work unless they have very long run times, or if they're more self-contained stories like Barry. But this type of format doesn't really work with One Piece. There's too much stuff to go through to just have it be 8 episodes, 50 minutes each. One Piece has been criticized for its pacing in pretty much every possible medium. Like, this isn't really a new complaint, but this one isn't really any different either. While it's not unbearably slow like the anime, it is just a little too fast. It doesn't ruin the show for me, but it is a complaint. But still, those complaints for the most part are very minor compared to the praises I have for it. While the show isn't perfect and I don't see it winning any awards or anything, it's a great adaptation of a wonderful story that offers a new perspective of the story that can very easily resonate both with fans of the source material and with new fans, since it keeps the heart of the manga while forging its own identity in the same breath. I think if Netflix markets this thing well, it can be a real success for them. I'm very glad to say that this show and everyone involved here proved me wrong. The only thing that worries me is that I can almost guarantee you that Netflix will see the reviews and numbers from this show and just start greenlighting other anime live actions, expecting them to be just as successful. And I'm sorry, but no, that's not gonna happen. That just isn't going to be a thing. Please do not greenlight more American-made anime live action series or movies. Please don't. It's already too late anyways. They're gonna do it still. I don't know why I'm even trying. I wanted to judge this show on its own merit, since I don't think judging it in comparison to other live action anime adaptations is really fair. I like to just review and judge things on their own as an adaptation and as a TV show. And I think One Piece succeeds in both of these things. I don't need to mention stuff like Dragon Ball Evolution or Cowboy Bebop to get my point across. This is just a good show that I would recommend to people who don't really know One Piece, and I could see them really liking the show and getting into the story more. So yeah, this show to me is a success. At least I hope it'll be. But that is going to wrap up my review of the Netflix One Piece live action TV show adaptation. You get the idea. I just wanted to point out that I did recently introduce channel memberships to my account. While I don't do YouTube for the money, I do kind of need, money to live and not die of starvation. So if you guys want to see more content with more effort and better editing and resources put into them, joining my channel as a member would help a lot. You get exclusive posts, early early access to videos, some badges, and custom emojis. I will add more features as well in the future, so I think it's a worthy investment. It's only like $3, so you're not going to be like breaking the bank just to support me. But if you don't want to, that's fine too. I'm not going to force you or anything. I'm not going to be a beggar, but if you want to join, I would greatly appreciate that. I will love you. I will love you forever. But anyways, that's really all I have to talk about today. I'll see you guys next time. Y'all have a good day.